back to the Real Recovery Show. We air every Friday at noon, and it's been an entire year. I think we're on episode 54 now. It's just been it's been crazy good, and the people I've gotten to meet, and some of my friends that I've gotten to interview, who I love their recovery, and it's been illuminating, and it's just I don't know. I'm so grateful. And I hope we get to keep continuing doing this. So today's episode is somebody that I met when he came back to Vegas. I guess you'd been here before.
No,
you've never been here before. Okay. Yeah, well, there you go. That's the introduction. My friend Jimmy, he moved out here about 8.5 years ago and got sober again, but this time for good. He's been somebody who I've seen walk through a lot, and I've seen him walk through getting even married, which is just the most amazing thing. And we used to go out to eat at night after recovery events for sushi and joke and laugh, and it was really good. And I just love his story. I love his recovery. He's right in service. He's all the way plugged in, and he's like me. Like, he wants to understand, he wants to move through, and he wants to be helpful. And so we're going to start off just sharing a little bit about how it was for little Jimmy when you were growing up, and then we'll take it from there.
Thanks, Lisa. I mean, so growing up, my parents separated when I was really young. I was about 18 months old. My parents had separated. And I stayed with my dad. So the first 13 years, I lived with him, and he raised me. We lived in a little apartment. There was a 4-apartment house, like a home that had gotten converted into apartments, and we lived there. There were a lot of kids on my street, probably 20, 25 kids around my age. So we'd run the streets, and then when the street lights came on, we'd come in, and that was cool. That was pretty cool until 4th grade going into 5th grade. I remember it was like the first time I experienced real self-centered fear.
Yeah.
So I had we had our summer break, and I remember 5th grade. I walked into school, and I pretty much dressed myself. My dad was not a very stylish dresser. So I remember walking into school with like some Nike high tops and these aquamarine sweatpants and a red flannel shirt with an X-Men t-shirt on. And I had like a rat tail, like a 6-inch rat tail on the back with like a shaved head.
Oh, wow.
And walking into middle school, and I mean, like in 4th grade, everybody dressed kind of goofy.
Right.
But in 5th grade, everybody seemed to not dress the way that I was dressed.
Oh.
And first day of school, I was absolutely terrified and was like, got to get rid of my wardrobe, got to start dressing like other people dress, got to start to try to fit in. And every day was scary from then on. Growing up, it was always looking at the older kids and like wondering what they were doing, and everybody looked pretty comfortable. I was not comfortable at all.
What made it so impactful for you? Like, 'cause some people would just be like, you know what, that's me. I beat to my own drum. But for you, you felt like no, you needed to fit in. You needed to be part of. Right?
I have no idea where it came from. I remember walking into first period class and just being very self-aware and extremely uncomfortable. I mean, it came on like a wave, like a little mini panic attack.
Gotcha.
And it's the first time anything like that had ever happened to me in my life.
To be self-conscious, yeah.
To be self-aware on that level, and it was scary.
So then what happened after that?
So after that, I just started dressing like other people. I cut the little rat tail off. And I just tried to fit in. And even, from an educational standpoint, I think I was so concerned with what people thought. Like, if the teacher called on me to answer a question, I would completely freeze. Like, I didn't want to talk in front of people. I I didn't think I was smart enough. Like all of this stuff kind of just snowballed from this initial fear. It all kind of started with how I looked, but then it started turning into like how I'm representing, like how I'm presenting myself to people around me. And I don't think kids are supposed to think like that.
Yeah. That's interesting. I know, like, for me, I missed a lot of school when I was growing up, and so I felt, because education is so cumulative, I felt stupider and stupider because I felt like I couldn't answer questions and stuff. And I also was super self-conscious and afraid of what people thought. God, giving other kids that kind of power at such a young age, looking back, what was the big deal?
Right.
Like, you look back and you go, that's stupid. It was nothing. But at the time, it was everything. It was my entire world. You know, it was life or death. So I could totally understand that.
So I think it was almost like an introduction to like my own ego, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was like that first sort of effect produced by self-centeredness,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because I'd never been self-centered. Like I probably was. I'm sure I thought about myself a lot, but I don't ever remember thinking about myself. I don't ever remember feeling bad for being me. And I think that was where it started. And I mean, literally up until sobriety, like self-aware to the max.
Yeah.
You know?
Hyper self-focused.
Extremely self-focused.
Mm-hmm. Hyper vigilant. Yeah.
But in comparison to other people,
Yeah.
you know? Like,
Yeah,
didn't
yeah.
really think for myself, couldn't really... I think I was scared to do stuff I even wanted to do because I'm like, well, what's everybody else doing? You know?
What were your parents like? Were your parents people who thought for themselves, or were they people who tried to fit in?
I don't know a whole lot about them.
No?
In that they were young when they had me. So my mom was 19 and my dad was 21.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they kind of like had the kid and then figured it out later. But I feel like a lot of that was going on at that time. A lot of my friends' parents were divorced. Very few of my friends' parents are like still together today.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of single parenting
Yeah.
in my area.
Interesting. Okay, and then so what was your first experience then with dealing with that self-consciousness?
I mean, I never really dealt with it until
I mean, medicating it or...
Yeah. So the first substance I had tried, I was 13. And by that time, I mean, once a lot of these kids that I spent time around were a little more emancipated, like there was a lot of fighting, there was a lot of just a lot of trash talking. Like, kids were really mean.
Yeah, they can be.
And like
For
right
sure.
up into my freshman year of high school, I mean, kids were just brutal, and I'd watch these kids beat each other up behind the school, and you know, they'd dye their hair crazy colors, wearing giant baggy Jenko jeans, and everybody skateboarded, and I was terrified of those guys. I was dying to be one of those guys.
Yeah.
I wanted to be one of those guys so bad.
So that you wouldn't be at the effect of it, that you would be in the power position of it.
But
Yeah.
even being around them, I think I was more scared of them than
Yeah.
I was other people.
Yeah.
Because there was this need for approval.
Yeah.
And they were not people that gave you approval unless
Yeah.
you did something crazy. And I was very quiet, so I always kind of just stalked them, like observed them and dressed like them. But the first time I got loaded, I was 13, and I smoked some pot with some friends. I was terrified of that too. I mean, they had the DARE program, and like cops used to come into the school, and they'd talk to you about all the substance abuse and what happens. And I remember smoking my first joint and the effect, and just thinking like, why would anybody not want to do this?
Right.
You know? And it completely shifted my perception. Like, everything I wanted to do after that revolved around, well, in the beginning, just kind of smoking pot. I couldn't really get alcohol.
Yeah.
Too young.
Right.
But weed was very accessible.
But changing the way you feel, to be
Yes.
able to be comfortable in your own skin, to be able to not be so self-conscious, you know,
Yeah.
to tone it down.
All of that melts
Yeah.
away.
That's
right?
the same with me. Everything I ever did, I mean, you might have done the things that made you go up. I don't know, but we'll get to that. But I didn't do the things that made me go up. I did all the things that made me mellow out, calm me down, and be less self-conscious. You know, I needed that. I needed to think less. I needed to think less of myself. I needed to think less of being concerned about whether or not I'm doing it right or fitting in or something like that. And it's just somehow just the alcohol, the pot, the pain pills, the cigarettes, the whatever I ended up ever doing was always to just, can we take her down a notch? You know, because I was too much for my own self. It was just too much for me. So
see, and I didn't even know it was fixing that stuff. I mean, it was
I
like
don't think any of us know at the
revolutionary
time.
for me.
Yeah.
You know, the mental shift, the feelings, like, I mean, it was like winning the lottery.
Yeah.
And there's nothing, I never felt more like myself than when I was getting loaded.
Mm-hmm.
And so that was kind of where everything started for me. And I think people liked me more. I liked me more, but I think it was because my personality like loosened up. It was almost like I became the guy I was supposed to be the whole time.
It is really profound that the more we care what people think, the less we actually will be really truly liked or appreciated, because we're being fake and we're trying too hard and we're stressed and we're not able to loosen up, we're not able to totally relax. And then here you were, somebody who just was yourself, and then you became self-conscious, and now you're introverted and you're like concerned and controlled, and you're not able to just loosen up and be who you were before you cared too much about that. And then here you are doing something to help you to go back to allowing yourself to be who you are. But we don't know that while we're doing it. We don't know that, oh, you mean I could actually bypass the whole need for the drugs and just change my need to be liked and all that. But yeah, no, we don't. We think, no, the answer is, the solution is being liked, and the problem is not being liked.
Right. Well, I think the biggest problem for me was that, you know, I had no resources to be the kind of guy I wanted to be on my own, you know? And that's always been a big thing with sobriety and these intermittent relapses, is that after long periods of time being sober, you start to get to a place where you're just like on your own. You're like, what is the point?
Yeah.
Like, everything is difficult. I don't feel like my genuine true self. You know, there's a lot of people pleasing and a lot of just trying to figure out where you fit. You know, very big spiritual issue that I had no idea was even a thing prior to meeting some of the people that I've met over the years and talking to some of these guys with this really good perspective and this very functional disciplines, right? So, I don't know.
So that was pot. And then, so how did you get introduced to the other things?
So I was very cautious for the first maybe 2 years, just because all the stuff that I had heard.
Right.
And eventually somebody talked me into taking a half a hit of ecstasy. And that was even more profound than the 2 years of smoking pot. I mean, that changed my whole life, man. If you really want to open up to people and get vulnerable,
Like, hey,
that's how you do it.
Hi.
And so from there, that kind of opened the floodgates. From there, it was like, well, I want to try everything. I want to know what all of this stuff does and how it does it. And, you know, I just took on a new image, right? Like, I went from kind of having no sort of personality direction to becoming this, like, you could just tell. I was a huge pothead. And all the stuff that comes with that. You know, you dress the part, you act the part. There's like a lot of that dialogue between people. You're talking about different pills that you took and what it was like taking them. Like, very experimental phase. But, I mean, I ran the gamut in a very short amount of time. So by 15, I mean, I was doing ketamine, I was doing ecstasy, we were taking mushrooms, acid. This stuff would come into my town in waves. So for like a couple of months, everybody I knew was just taking acid. So it was like, I guess we're taking acid. And then it was like, for a couple of months, everybody was doing ketamine. And so it was like, I guess we're doing ketamine.
Where did you grow up?
New Jersey.
In New Jersey.
Northern New Jersey.
Joyzy. Interesting. That's really interesting. You know, I just had this aha. I don't know how true it is and if I would have ended up this anyway, but I also was pretty reserved and observing, and felt like I was like watching everybody, studying everybody, and felt like a very way detached. I also had that self-consciousness and whatever, and somehow, partly out of necessity, ending up, being a stripper and everything, but like also, just from the drugs and the alcohol and that whole like thing that it brought out of me, I developed the extrovert, the fake self, the false self. I developed, who do I need to be? Who do I need to be? What do I need to look like to get what I want, to have what I want, to not lose what I think I need? Like, there was so much of an investment in that. But I am very much an introvert, and people, they don't even, like, I don't get charged up and go do tons of things with people. So my default is introverted, and my disease always isolated me. Like at the end of the day, I ended up alone, drugged, in a house, going out of my mind. So I just had this aha, like just listening to you, that, how much of that ability to like schmooze and be that person came from, that life for a bit, but at the end of the day, my true self is still the one that wants to sit and kind of be and prefers one-on-one connections. And, it's just interesting, like how much of that developed during that time, because here you are doing all this, and then you became that part of that, somebody who was wanting to be who you really were, but yet experiencing another aspect of yourself that maybe you wouldn't have had access to at the moment, which sounds very pro-drugs, but stay tuned.
Well, and I mean, getting sober, I had no idea who I was.
Right.
I had no idea.
And then we could do all that without it, for sure.
Well, because the foundation of all my relationships over that first 8 or 10 year period, the foundation of it was the substances. Mm-hmm. And so the guy that everybody got to know for 8 or 10 years, all these people I grew up with, when I started coming into my own, the foundation of my personality was just rooted in substance, and it changed me, right?
Yeah.
So the whole time all these people know me, they're getting this version of me that's not really me. I don't even know it's not me. But I would have given anything to stay there and be that guy for the rest of my life, There was some of the best times I ever had in my life were in those first 10 years, and then when the problems start, it's like fun with problems, and then it's problems with fun occasionally, and then it's just problems. It turns on you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It stops working. Okay, so what did end up happening?
So I started getting into a lot of trouble. My freshman year of high school, I had cut 2 months of school. So I didn't show up for literally 4 weeks. And my poor dad, man, my dad was working full-time, 50-hour work weeks, single dad, raising this kid. And as soon as I'm old enough to sneak out of the house, I'm sneaking out of the house. And so I stopped going to school. I just stopped going. I'm catching the letters from the school because I get home from school before my dad does. And then I did another month of skipping school where I went 2 days and then I wouldn't show up for 3, or I'd show up for 3 and then I wouldn't show up for 2. And finally a truant officer came to my house. It was actually in my basement with a friend of mine. We were smoking weed in our basement. And when I went to school the next day, they had drug tested me. So they pulled me out of school, took me to a hospital, and that was my introduction to treatment. So obviously I failed. 14. So I fail. They put me in an outpatient treatment facility, and this is a really peculiar thing. The mental aspect of the disease. So I take my drug test, and they tell me you have 2 weeks, and then we're going to test your levels again. Because, back then, this is probably still true, I don't know, but it takes pot about 4 weeks to get out of your system. So they gave me my first drug test and then told me in 2 weeks you're getting another one. So the second I left there for my intake, I was like, okay, I can get loaded tonight, but I can't for the next 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And then jump ahead 5 days later, I'm like, okay.
Still getting loaded, making new negotiations.
I have to stop this week, but I also have to drink a gallon of water every day.
Right. Oh, God, yes.
And right up to the point of that next drug test, I remember walking into that place thinking, what's the big deal? I'm 14. What are they going to do?
Yeah.
You know?
Test me, whatever.
Yeah. So just the way my mind changes,
Yeah.
and that hadn't changed. That I'll tell you, that is a reoccurring pattern the whole time. You know, it's always been like that.
We renegotiate with ourselves. We have great intentions. Okay. And so what happened at that rehab or that treatment?
So after failing 3 more drug tests, they wanted to put me in an inpatient treatment facility, which was terrifying. And I had friends around me who were getting in trouble too, and they were like, just stop for a month, you know? Just quit for a month. It's not that hard. And I couldn't. I mean, I literally could not. I don't know if it was my mind. It wasn't there was no physical addiction to anything I was doing at that time, so I guess it was all mental. But I remember thinking, yeah, of course, it's a good idea, but not being able to do it. And they wanted to put me...
Because who would you be without it?
Right.
If you found yourself in it and you believed that you needed it to be yourself, then it's literally a fear psychologically that happens that says, I'm going to die. Who I am, living who I am, is going to die. Like, who would I be without this drug?
You know, a lot of this stuff for me was instincts.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of rational thought behind it.
Of course not. But there is, actually. Like, the mind actually thinks these things, but the conscious mind doesn't actually hear all the da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It just hears the result.
Right.
And it just goes, great idea. Makes sense to me.
Yep.
Totally makes sense to me. That's why the addiction can speak to me in my own voice, using my own logic, and act like it knows some shit. Because it does know some shit. It spent a lot of time while I was sleeping figuring that shit out. And then this is what it's come up with, and it feels pretty good. Okay, let's move on. I'm obviously going to be doing this now.
Well, I've gotten more introspective as I've stayed sober and gotten older. But back then, I mean, I just knew I needed to protect this thing.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't need to understand it. It was just, I need to protect this. And so I had packed up, I'd packed my stuff up. I talked to the head of the treatment program who was going to put me in this inpatient. And I told him my mother lived in upstate New York and I was just going to move up there and start my life over. And, my dad felt bad. He didn't know what to do with me. So I did. So I packed. I moved to New York. My mother lived in like the middle of nowhere. I mean, very rural upstate New York. And so I grew up 30 minutes from New York City. Mm-hmm. So very, very just packed, overpopulated area. Tons and tons of people. Mm-hmm. And when I moved up there, it was the beginning of my sophomore year. And there were 36 kids in my class. So I went from like 2,000 kids to 36 and major culture shock. Mm-hmm. But, I adapt. I fit in. And I was scared. The principal at the old school had actually called DSS, Department of Social Services, and told him this kid's got a drug problem. And he just skipped town instead of going to rehab. And so my mother got a call from a caseworker, and there was a whole bunch of stuff with that. It was very stressful in the beginning, and I was scared. And I was able to stop. Fear at that point in time was enough to kind of get me to stop for a couple of months.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now speed up. You've gone through school. You're out of school. What happened?
Well, even in high school, so out there I gravitate towards people that do stuff that I like to do. Mm-hmm. And there were a lot of pharmaceutical drugs going around. I think the club stuff and the designer stuff wasn't accessible. Mm-hmm. But there was fentanyl before fentanyl was cool. There was...
I don't know how cool it is, but okay.
There's a lot of narcotic pain medication. A lot of guys out there, they had labor jobs, and there was a lot of drinking. So I shifted from, designer drugs to painkillers, heavy-duty painkillers, and booze. And by the time I graduated, it became very apparent to me that upstate New York was my problem. It was not me. It was where I lived. It was the quality of life. And, at that point, and my sister lives out there too. And so I can't sit in a room with my mother or my sister without getting into a fight. And I finally just had enough. And I was like, you know what? I'm going back to New Jersey. I call my dad. He takes me back. And so I leave New York, little trail of chaos. I'd been arrested a couple of times when I was living out there, and just went back home.
Okay. All right. And then what happened?
So I got back home, and I started dating a girl that I went to high school with, and she was a big cocaine user. That was something, for whatever reason, I had stayed away from for a while. She loved it. She was a huge advocate for it. So of course I'm like, well, let's try it. I absolutely fell in love with it, and so we started doing that. So we did that for about 3 years, and her father was a drunk, and he owned a gas station and used to go into work at midnight, count his books, and he'd bring a 2 or 3 inch stack of cash home out of the register, and then he'd go to the bar at 8 o'clock in the morning. He'd come home at 4, and he'd be drunk, and we'd have to feed him dinner before he passed out. And so every night when he would pass out, we would peel $200, $300, $400 off that stack.
Yeah.
And I mean, we did that for like 3 years straight.
I used to do that with my dad's money too. My dad was an architect, and he would get cash advances, and he would get them in stacks, and because he had to pay for the men and the supplies and whatever like that. And I would sneak into his office, and I would just take, well, he's not going to notice this. He has lots of those.
Right.
He's not going to notice this because he has lots of those. He never caught me. I ended up getting caught a whole different other way. But yeah, that's crazy. All right. And so, so now you're on cocaine and no alcohol yet? Alcohol wasn't a thing?
Intermittent drinking, but still, I wasn't 21.
Right.
So buying it was tough, and having access to it was difficult. So
So crazy.
got the crash course and everything else.
Yeah. Okay. What happened next?
So, I don't know. I think I was... Well, right after I graduated high school, I'd moved home and we had gotten together. So I must have been 18.
Okay.
At the end of that, we were freebasing it. So, and that's like 5th gear for cocaine, right? And so, I mean, I'm not eating for 4 or 5 days at a time. Neither is she. We're getting crazy, like drug-induced psychosis. I'm hearing things in the house that aren't there. I'm hiding knives. Like I have a knife under the bed. I've got one in the bathroom. They're stashed all over the place. I'm peeking out windows.
Yeah.
It's terrifying.
I used to
stuff.
joke that in recovery I've had to heal from things that didn't happen.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of things
Yeah, I
that
know.
looked like they happened.
Yeah. My imagination was fired. Yeah. All right, what happened next then?
So her mother lived in Tennessee, and her mom found out what we were doing, and thank God, because we were in a bad place for a long time. And her mom packed her up, flew into town overnight, and packed up her car and drove her to Tennessee. And that was the first time I was alone in a long time. So I had gone home to live with my family. I had nowhere else to go. Nobody knew what to do with me. And I had a really ugly depression. And I just started stealing stuff from my family. I mean, anything I get my hands on, it was just with a sense of urgency. Taking everything I could get.
To get drugs.
To get drugs, to fix the way I felt. There was a lot of, I mean, we were together for a long time. And I mean, it broke my heart. It really did. I couldn't, the last night that she left, we promised each other we were going to be sober. And I meant it. I swore, we were crying in each other's arms. And a couple hours later, all of a sudden that impulse kicks in, and I'm just like, listen, I'm sorry, but I have to go and I'll be back. And so we spent the night loaded, and the next day when she left, that was our last night together. And
Have you ever heard from her since?
I've talked to her since. We've reconnected. We had some stuff that we needed to clean up between each other.
Did she ever get sober?
I think she did for a little while, but the last time I spoke to her, she wasn't.
Okay. All right. At this point, we're going to take a quick break. Please remember that the opinions expressed here are strictly those of the people who gave them and do not represent any 12-step program or should replace your own intuition or professional medical advice. See you in a bit. The Meeting Space is a facility with over 100 weekly recovery meetings for addiction from alcohol, drugs, sex, food, gambling, codependency, and PTSD. When someone is scared to go to their first meeting,
We walk them through the process, ask them and answer questions to assuage their concerns. Many are court-ordered to attend, and we provide free court papers and teach them the process. Our glass-enclosed, soundproof children's playroom enables parents to be in a meeting while watching their children. We have healing workshops, craft fairs, and special authors who come to teach and sit with our fellowships. During COVID, we were declared an essential business by the County Commissioner's Office. We were kept open so that we can continue our daily work with traumatized chronic relapsers and those who would have used alcohol or drugs in isolation. Local businesses rent our space as well to financially help with this mission, and they get to have a great location for their business meeting or training. The Recovery Store in the center of our facility provides literature, clothing, medallions, and custom gifts to encourage, aid in, and celebrate a person's recovery from alcohol, drugs, PTSD, or unhealthy behaviors. Both the Recovery Store and the meeting space are open every day, including holidays. Saving lives, educating the community, reducing social stigma, providing a safe place for people to heal. Our nonprofit is supported entirely by donations by people like you who want everyone to have a place to go to heal.
Welcome back to The Real Recovery Show. You can watch us on Facebook, YouTube, and on Amazon Fire TV. You can listen to us on the PHLV radio app. You can get our podcast on the Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and iHeartRadio. You can go to themeetingspace.com and you can see all of our episodes listed there. And if you want to be on a future episode, you can fill out an intake form. Please do share our videos on YouTube with other people, and maybe post on Facebook. Help us get the word out. And so before the break, we were talking about what led up to some of the more tumultuous experience in Jimmy's life that he's now going to share about, and his recovery. So go ahead.
So after I had moved back into my family's house, there was a very self-destructive couple of months. There was a runaway attempt. Was voluntarily homeless for 2 months. And then I'd gotten jumped by a drug dealer. Called my family, went back home, and I went to my first inpatient treatment facility. Learned a lot, got a lot of information. Spent 83 days in there, and then ended up in a recovery house. And a lot of my problems, all of my problems up to that point could be traced back to drugs and alcohol. It wasn't like Jimmy's a bad kid, you know, he has a drug and alcohol problem. And so, I took my first legitimate shot at sobriety. And something happened, something really crazy to me that I didn't anticipate. Being sober in itself is so uncomfortable. And at first, there's a lot of plausibility, right? Like there's a lot of things you can look at. Well, like look at what happened with your family, right? Look at the things that happened to you. Of course you'd be uncomfortable if those things happened. But there was a weird progression to it. It was like the longer I stayed sober. So the best way I could describe to you what it looked like is I would wake up in the morning terrified. No idea what I'm scared of. But I remember waking up and just a fear of leaving the house. And I would carry that fear around me all day.
I had that too, yeah.
And I'd get a job and I'd be scared at work. And I'd get into a relationship and I would be, and it's in my operating system, right? My fundamental who I am.
Right, how do I do this? Who am I? Yep.
That fear is there. And nobody cooperates with you. And when you're scared and you're desperate, people are frustrating. And so I would get home at the end of the day and I would be angry. So I would go to bed angry. And then I would wake up the next day scared and I would go to bed angry. And I did that for about 11 and a half months. And I completely tapped out. I was like, my first best effort at staying sober on my own, total failure, right? And so I had a slip that lasted 2 weeks. And I had dried out again, And I had kind of assessed my situation, and I'm sort of scratching my head trying to figure out what happened. Because the second I had relapsed, in my mind, I'm thinking like, what's your family gonna think? It was almost like I came to my senses when it kicked in, you know? Like I started to feel comfortable again, but then all of the guilt and the shame and the things I wasn't thinking about when I was on a mission to go get loaded started coming into my mind when I calmed down. And it's like, what a loser, man. Like, how could you do this? And so I praised my situation. 2 weeks later, I'd kind of dried out, and for the next 3.5 years, I became a 1 to 2 year mover. I would stay in a place until I didn't feel welcome anymore, which is not hard to do for me. You know, I'm very sensitive, and I would change jobs every 3 to 6 months, and I would change relationships every 3 to 6 months, and I'm just kind of shopping the combination of events that's supposed to make me feel better, like trying to figure this life thing out. And I being in my early 20s at that time too was like, there's so much going on emotionally. I mean, I have an 18-year-old at home, and I'm like, I don't know how you survive that whole age, right?
Yeah,
like,
right. Yeah.
So that on top of all this other stuff, and I'm trying to be financially emancipated. My family's not helping me. I'm trying to figure this stuff out on my own. And so, you know, I'm working to pay bills. I mean, I got thrown into adulthood very aggressively, which should have happened years before it did. And the same thing starts happening, you know, like the relationships and the changing jobs and the moving. It's like a distraction from something inside of me that I can't really identify with. But there is something going on inside of me, and it's not okay. And after 3.5 years of this kind of shuffling around and really upsetting other people who are watching me do this stuff, I slip again. And that one lasted 2 months. And I've never been able to pick on my own when I quit. I've never been like, today is the day I'm quitting, and actually been able to follow through, which was another thing that I couldn't really understand. And so after 2 months, I managed to stop, and now I'm kind of scared, you know. But that kind of fear is temporary. My ego comes back, and you know, I want to be self-sufficient, and I want to take care of myself. I have these ideals for what my life is supposed to look like, and how you're supposed to cooperate with what my life's supposed to look like. And so I go back at it again, and same thing. I'm changing jobs, changing relationships. I have outrageous needs that are not getting met. I mean, very unreasonable.
Yeah, that's why they say that self-confidence is not the answer, because self-confidence without true humility is dangerous.
Sure. I believe that. I mean, it's like a scale, right? Like my level of comfort is 100% relative to how self-involved I am. You know? Yeah. When I'm overly self-involved, and it doesn't really matter what
it's really easy in the beginning of a job, or easier in the beginning of a job or the beginning of a relationship, to have all the good feels. You know, they don't know me that well yet. I don't know them that well yet. Everybody's on their best behavior. We have fantasies. We have hopes. Not too many bubbles have been popped, you know. And then as you get further and further, I want more. This is not enough. I'm too much. I'm not enough. Stuff starts to happen. There's conflicts. There's things being built up. And then 3-6 months down the road, it's like, all right, this isn't going to work. Yeah. But you know what the problem is? It's them. Next. Right. All right. So what happened then?
So I stay sober on my own for about 4 years, and there's another slip, and this one is the worst I've ever experienced. Nobody was more shocked than I was when it was over. It was 2 years. I had enrolled in school, and I had taken a bunch of stuff from this college, and I ended up having to fly back home and turn myself in for this later, but I took a bunch of stuff on camera over a 2-month period, and 3 months into that, I wholeheartedly understood, like, you have to stop or this is going to get worse. And I could not. Every resource I had failed completely. It was the first time. It was also the first time I ever tried to quit, not because of circumstances, but because I really wanted to stop. And I could not quit.
Yeah.
no matter what.
That's one of the most horrible experiences, is when you yourself know you want to stop and you can't.
Yeah.
It's not somebody else threatening you. It's not the fear of losing something. It's you just, there's a part of you that's like, wait, I'm done. Wait, I'm done.
Yep.
What are you talking about? I'm done. How come I can't be done? I need to be done. It's like the feeling of being imprisoned in addiction is horrid.
So that was 2 years. And about 18 months of that 2 years, I was hovering around 130, 140 pounds. I mean, I made myself sick. And I held on to that for as long as I could. I you know, after you try to quit so many times and fail, it just feels like it's easier to just continue to do what you're doing and just deal with the consequences later.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of the condition I was in when I came out to Vegas. I had a friend who I had helped back in 2007, and she was sober for several years at the time. And the girl I was dating, her and the girl I was dating were friends, and they managed to talk me into getting on a plane and coming out here.
That's when I met you.
And that's when we met.
Yeah. That's crazy. Yeah. And I know your friend. Yes. So, wow. Okay, so then you got sober. And this time, what was it, do you feel, of coming out to Vegas that combined with this time? Why do you feel like this time stuck?
I think this was the first time that I ever tried to quit and I couldn't. And I feel like that idea was like solidified into me for the first time.
That you needed help.
That I needed help and I couldn't stop on my own.
Yeah.
You know, because I have tried many, many times, and I know lots of people who have tried.
That's very
many
profound,
times.
because the ego is quite resilient. Like you said, it's like it'll keep popping back up, it'll get stronger, and it'll go, oh, I'm okay now, we lived, we're fine, we just need to change this, we just need to change that. People, places, and things, but not me, right? And then you get to this place where humility is now introduced, and you realize you do need help, and that you can't do it alone. And so that ego that wants to believe that it can do it, which probably still threatened to come out many times in sobriety, because it does, but it's not what you're running on now, because the gig is up. Like, once you know you can't do it, like you really can't, and you admit that to your innermost self, that you can't do it alone. The humility that's involved in that, like you don't even really want to try that game again, because you know now you can't unknow that. Yeah,
I mean, I think that's the golden ticket that gets your foot in the door, right?
Yeah.
Like, that gets you into the
Humility.
realm.
Absolutely.
But staying there, I mean, one thing I started to understand is that I'm kind of stuck in a loop. I'm stuck in a loop where, you know, it hurts and I don't get to decide when I stop. But when I do stop, I almost instantly start to, as things get better, I start to forget how bad things were. And I go right back into management.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
I go right back into, I need to fix myself. I mean, my family didn't know where I was for 2 years. I remember calling my grandmother when I had been out here for a month or two and telling her, I mean, they were shocked I was on the other side of the country. But the first thing I say, not I'm sorry, not I'm okay, I'm like, I got a job. It's a good job. It's what I want to do.
Uh-huh.
I have a place to stay, and I'm stable. And my grandmother had said to me, she's like, it's funny how that always happens to you. She's like, it's funny how everywhere you go, you always land on your feet. She's like, everybody back home is suffering. She's like, detectives have showed up at my house looking for you.
Wow.
She's like, I have lawyers calling because they want to take your case. And I didn't know any of this stuff.
Yeah.
And she's like, you left a whirlwind back here, so I'm glad you're there.
Yeah.
And of course you landed on your feet, but just so you know, everybody here is cleaning up your mess.
Wow.
And there was a lot of pot shots, and there was a lot of stuff like that I really had to take a look at. And at 20, 21, it's cute, but at 30 years old, it's like,
it's not even cute, really, at 20,
yeah.
21. But less cute at 30, I'll give you that.
Way less cute.
All right. And so you started becoming teachable.
I became very teachable. And not for a very long time either, because again, it just seems to be my default. Once I move away from the major crises and problems, I sort of just revert back to, and I tell you, I believe I still have that problem today.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I believe without
Yeah.
certain disciplines and certain
Yeah.
things that I stick to,
Yeah.
I go right back to being that guy
Yeah.
again.
I could do it too. I could do it too. I could, and you know how it starts happening too? I start accepting credit for things going well. And then I start self-blaming for things not going well. And then I start getting in fear. And I start thinking I need to do more. I need to think more, do more, whatever. It's more me, less God. More me, less God. More me, less God. And I think, well, this is just, I don't know why God has me doing all this. I don't know why I'm going through all this, because my whole perception is now more me. It's the disease of me. It's the disease of more me. That's this whole thing, this addiction, you know? And we're quite resilient at being more me's, you know? And so, yeah, that's pretty profound.
Well, and of course the God thing has to fit into this somewhere, you
Has
know?
to be.
On my own, I can't create a sustainable life for myself where I'm comfortable and I'm sober at the same time. So there has to be something bigger than me.
Right.
And I didn't have a problem with that. I had a problem with the logistics of doing business with a God. Because I never had a problem with God. I spent a lot of time praying in those years that I wasn't using or getting loaded. But it seemed like prayer on its own was not enough, which was very frustrating. Because
Yeah.
how many people do you know that tell you, well, just pray about it?
Yeah.
Just pray
Right.
about it.
Yeah. But without action, without reliance, without humility. Yeah.
So that's what I figured out is God is 100% in your feet. And it's interesting because you can do things in protest and still get the same results, you know? But you can be this, you know, absolute believer, and if you don't change the way you behave, not in regards to drinking, but how you live,
Yeah.
that this stuff just doesn't work,
Yeah.
you know?
Yep. I
So
agree.
this was tough for me. And the stakes are high because when you don't do it, there is a downward progression, right? And it's a slow progression. And I think recovery is slow too.
Yeah.
It takes time to get better, but I tell you, when you're better, it takes time to get worse. And it's very slow. But
It's so slow that we don't even realize that we're slipping. We don't even realize that we're negotiating again. We don't realize that we're like telling ourselves all over again what we think our highest good looks like, and whether or not we need to go to a recovery event, or whether or not we need to talk to a person, or whether or not this is worth even looking or writing about. You know, it's just, it's slow enough that it passes under the radar, you know?
yeah.
But it's fast enough that it's deadly and destructive.
Well, and so that, you know, that experience of, I mean, my ego was just ground to dust when I got here. It was a very short time, but it was the first time I really got scared. I tell you, I don't think I ever really thought this was going to kill me. There was never a fear, like maybe intellectually, right? But my innermost self, in my gut, I knew I barely made it here with my life this time around.
Yeah.
That was not my plan,
Yeah.
you know? 2 years of moving and trying to get sober on my own was not my plan.
Yeah.
Like, none of this stuff happened.
It's hard to rationalize and justify when you start to see the effects really add up. You know, that, oh wow, I can actually lose this. Oh wow, my family's actually experiencing this now. Oh wow, legally, this is what's happening now. What happened with the legal situation, with the stealing?
So I ended up having to fly home to take care of that. I mean, when I got here, my driver's license was suspended. There were several warrants for my arrest for drug charges. There was, God, I had like 14 points on my driver's license. And then I had this big theft charge from this college. And so I was talking to a friend of mine, and he was like, you know, man, if you're gonna stay sober for a long period of time, sooner or later you're gonna have to take care of this.
Yeah.
And my plan was like, well, if I get a scooter and I just bump around town on that for 7 years, there's some sort of law where
Right.
this just disappears, right? And that didn't work for me, man. That didn't fit in my heart. I had done a lot of work on myself up to that point.
Yeah.
When we had that conversation. I was sober about a year when we had that talk, and And I wasn't willing, and he told me to pray for willingness, which really upset me. But I did, you know, very skeptical,
Yeah.
and not really thinking it was gonna help. But eventually, I became flexible enough that I was like, you know what, maybe I should get on a plane and go figure this out, regardless of the cost. And at the time, I was single, so you know, I'm married today. There was no family that was going to be threatened by me going and turning myself in for this thing. And I was really surprised. I think the judge was impressed that I had come home at all, because this was 3-4 years prior, you know. So this was back in 2014. And then I had dried out I think I went back in 2017. I think I was like 14 or 15 months sober when I flew home. But quite a bit of time had passed, and I hadn't even been arrested for it yet. So I had flown home, and the judge was like, well, he's got to go down to the courthouse and get processed. And then my second court hearing, they let me come back here. They gave me probation. There was a fine, but there was no jail time, which was the thing I was worried about the most. Yeah, and I tell you, I don't
That's
know.
good.
I try not to give people advice when it comes to stuff like that, but that's just what I did.
Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing what happens when you lean into God and you do what you feel intuitively for you is your next right step. It's amazing the things that happen. That you can't even fathom that, because our head can tell us stories about, oh my God, I have this is what they want to do with me, what's going to happen, you know, and make us so scared that we don't do anything. I've experienced that many times.
Well, the really difficult stuff is where you get the shift in perception, right?
Yeah.
And it's where you really start to understand that, like, there is a working relationship between me and something out there.
Yeah.
But there are contingencies, you know? I mean, I don't think God makes tough terms, but I wouldn't say there are no terms.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And figuring that out, I mean,
Yeah.
it was very private, very personal journey. A lot of this stuff, I have a lot of friends who share similar ideals and beliefs, and we come together for that stuff. But a lot of this stuff I had done on my own, by myself.
Yeah.
I did not have a big cheering section. I did from here,
Right.
but I got on that plane, nobody was with me,
Yeah.
you know? And when
Just
I walked
you
into
and
that
God.
courtroom,
Yeah.
exactly. And so a lot of this stuff, you only understand it by doing it.
Yeah.
You can't intellectually wrap your head around what's going to happen, you
Yeah.
know? Because my plan was probably jail for a year, maybe 2, and then probation for 3 to 5 years, and getting stuck in a recovery house in South Jersey and losing everything I had worked for since I had been here. And thank God that didn't happen.
It's beautiful.
It was cool.
Yeah. And since then, I've seen you do so much. You've healed so much. You've walked through so much, and you've helped so many people. And then you got engaged and married to somebody you met in recovery. And so how did that come about?
So we had some mutual friends. We had seen each other around. We never really talked, and then we had kind of linked up one day. And it was funny because our first date, I had told her I'm an absolutely terrible candidate for a relationship. Like, I had a not great job at the time, right? I think I was making $10 or $11 an hour. I was climbing trees for a tree company, and I'm paying a lot of people back. And you know, as a result of my serial dating, there's a lot of angry ex-girlfriends, and I'm in the process of cleaning up a lot of this stuff. Like, I'm reaching out to them, and I'm
Making amends.
trying to have conversations, trying to create a dialogue, and really, you know, letting them know that, like, listen, you're not the only one. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think about this stuff. So I was doing some really good
Nice.
stuff.
Okay.
And I told her, I'm really not the guy you probably want to date, but if you want to, you know, let's start there.
You may be someone I give a future amends to.
Right.
But here we go.
Well, and a friend of mine had said something to me too that was really important. You know, he said, if this relationship doesn't work out, and it doesn't matter whose fault it is, if it's her fault or she's crazy or it's your fault, he said, you're the same guy you were the day you got off the plane, and you haven't changed at all. And for some reason, that just hit a little bit different, and I was like, we are never breaking up. We will never break up. And, you know, she's a phenomenal communicator. She's hilarious.
Yeah,
she's one
she
of my
is.
best friends.
Yeah.
And we've put a lot of effort and energy into taking care of each other first. And our value systems really line up. We
That's
have a lot of the
beautiful.
same goals. So we had gotten COVID, and we were stuck together in the house for 2 weeks, uninterrupted, sick, just awful sick, flu-like symptoms, and we like super fell in love.
Aw.
Like 2 full uninterrupted weeks together, and just all
COVID
snotty
love.
and sweaty
Ew.
with our dogs. And at the end of it, we just looked at each other and we were like, let's get married. Because we had talked about getting married, and I was very anti-marriage because it has a lot of religious nuance, and I'm not very religious. I respect
Plus, you also
religion,
didn't
but
grow up with parents who stayed married too, so
Yeah.
you didn't really have that example.
it was never a real piece of business for me.
Yeah.
So when we had first talked about it, I was like, no, it's not my thing. And then when we ended up getting married, it was more of a celebration of our relationship and the people who had been around from the very beginning. So a lot of mutual friends that do a lot of the same stuff that we do, and some family. And I mean, my wedding day was one of the coolest days of my
That's
life.
beautiful.
It's, you hear people say stuff like
Yeah,
that.
I saw it
and
on
it's like,
Facebook. I saw all the pictures, and I know that the people that were at your wedding were people that were really high quality friends, and it's just, it seemed like everybody was getting married in your groups. I was like, well, they're getting married, they'll get married, you get married. I was just like, wow, that's like crazy.
Yeah, we started a trend.
You did.
We've got another one in October. There was one we just went to in July. There was one October last year that we went to.
Yeah.
It was just boom, boom, boom. We started buying suits and dresses and lots of weddings.
It's
cool
beautiful,
though.
It's beautiful. She's beautiful. She's I've heard her share her story, and I love her light and her sense of humor. You guys are very compatible. You guys have a very compatible sense of humor. Like just the way you both deliver something funny. It's very similar. So you obviously spend a lot of time around each other.
Well, and that's taken a ton of work. I mean, really, if you want to grow spiritually, get into a relationship with somebody.
Absolutely.
Because you have to make personality sacrifices. You have to quiet you down to be helpful.
Yeah.
And I'm so lucky.
And to hear another person and to see another person and to really fall in love with them and not just love them for yourself.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's very huge. And so that's why whenever I hear people say, I can't get into a relationship because I need to work on me, I go, okay, maybe. But then there's a point in time where some of the stuff that you need to learn to be able to be in a relationship, you're going to have to learn in a relationship.
Right.
And if you're with the right person, they're going to learn with you.
Well, and I think if you're going to do anything worth doing and you're going to be sober at the same time, there's some fundamental, the one thing I missed is that there's some fundamental framework that has to happen, right? Like you have to, and this is my opinion, but your ego has to be crushed.
Yeah. Yeah.
But there 2 times.
Yeah.
First time when you're getting loaded.
Right.
Second time, there is a sober surrender that has to take place. And I tell you, everybody goes through it in different ways.
Yeah. And sometimes more than once.
The thing that
twice.
crushes you might not be the
times.
thing that crushes me, but I know that we all have to get to the same place if we're going to progress, if you're going to have anything that's really worth having.
And stop taking ourselves so seriously.
That too.
Yeah. Because if we are the most important person in our life, there's no room for anybody else. And there's no room for anybody to help us. And there's no room for us to be truly helpful to anybody else. And so I love your walk. I love everything. I love hearing you speak. There's always something I get out of it because it's obvious that you're focused and you sincerely want to know. And so thank you so much. Is there anything left? We have a few minutes left that you'd want to add about this experience of your recovery?
Other
Other than the fact that you're sweaty right now because we have no AC. AC.
It's been awesome. It's a lot of fun, but like we've been talking about, kind of there's this theme of consistency. And I guess I would say if you struggle with similar problems, just know that feeling good comes later. Right? I always thought I had to feel good to do this stuff first, and it's been the complete opposite. I have to do this stuff to feel good.
Yeah.
And that still rings true today, so.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like also that not just, in our society too, are very programmed to believe that we need to be more. You know, we need to think more, we need to be bigger, you know, we need to have more, and we need to have, you know, we need to think of ourselves more, we need to build our egos, we need to build our story of ourselves, we need to build. And we get too big for ourselves, we get too important for ourselves, we're too focused, our life becomes very self-centered and just self in the center. And, you know, it's just so interesting because it's only through true humility, you know, and it takes a while to learn what even humility is, right? Because we are so building this story of who we think we are because we're so afraid of humiliation, of not fitting in, of not being lovable, of being too much or not enough. But true humility is right relation with God, right relation with other people, and with ourselves. You know, that we don't have to be all the things. We don't have to worry about all that stuff. That we can let go of all of that, and there's something so natural in the flow of just being in that without having that. I've had my ego crushed many a time. I hope to not have to have it crushed again, but whenever I get where something comes up to heal, I know it's because I'm obviously too much focused on myself in the moment, you know.
Well, and it's very situational, right? Like, you know, achieving humility is not a static thing, right? Like my life changes,
yes,
and I have to be re-humbled, but it's part of that journey, right? Like,
Yeah.
I think one thing that's really helped me a lot is I figured out that part of the human journey is making mistakes, is looking like an idiot, it is saying the wrong thing. I heard a guy say,
it's okay too.
life is lived forward but understood backwards.
Yeah.
And if you are willing to look, you can change. But those mistakes are a super important component of growing, right? Without the mistakes, I don't grow. So
They make us teachable. They make us willing to even hear what the truth is.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we'd be running blind. So thank you so much for joining us. I love that you came on the show, and thank you for joining us today on the Real Recovery Show. We'd like to give a special thanks to our sponsor and gracious host, PHLV Radio, here in Las Vegas. See you next week.